We're here with Peter V'landys, the chairman of the Australian Rugby League Commission and the CEO of Racing New South Wales, and one of the most powerful men in Australia. Peter, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
The Everest, your baby, could this year's Everest be break all records in terms of turnover? Given the Hong Kong horse Kaging Rising's here, what can we expect from the Everest this year?
Look, I think it will break all records. The attention we'll get from Hong Kong will be exceptional. I mean, it's a personality horse with a lot of charisma. It's won its last 12 starts. And I just had the chairman of stewards who used to work for me, Mark Van Gestel, and I said to him, is this horse as good as they say? And he said, every bit. He said, it's a champion horse, it's a freak. It will give the Everest a big shake. And it's a big test for the horse as well, because the Everest is at break speed and the hustle and the bustle that goes with the race. It certainly will test them. But I think the interest will go through the highest levels this year.
In terms of turnover, do you reckon it could be the highest turnover race, wagering turnover race we've ever seen in Australia with that horse here?
Look, certainly from Hong Kong, but of course the Melbourne Cup generates a lot of turnover Australia-wide because it is the day that stops the nation. So the Everest is second, but this year it could go close to breaking all records in Asia.
You've normally got a surprise or two up your sleeve for spring. Is there something you can maybe give us a hint about that could be happening this spring we haven't seen before, or something new or different?
Look, there will be, but we'll be making that announcement in the next couple of weeks. It's certainly going to be a major change, but we're just going through all the processes. Naturally we have to consult our partner, the Australian Turf Club, but we'll announce that in due course.
Can't give us a hint?
No, not at the moment, because as I said, common courtesy says you've got to talk to your partner first, and we'll talk to the Australian Turf Club. And once we get their agreement, we'll announce it.
News out of Victoria in the last couple of weeks, $10 million for the Melbourne Cup. That's a big uplift. There's probably been no love lost between you and the Victorians at various points in the last decade. What do you make of that announcement?
Well, it's great for Australian racing to have an aspirational race like the Melbourne Cup go to 10 million. We always have to have aspirational races. The thing for me, though, is in New South Wales last year, we paid over $400 million in returns to participants. The closest any other state came was 110 million less than us. It was in 300 million. So we lead Australia by $110 million per annum in prize money. But the good thing for me is that 60 million of our prize money goes to maiden races. We have $100,000 super maidens each week. So we look after the bottom end of the industry, but we also look after the top end of the industry. It's important to get the right balance between aspirational races and your bread and butter races.
So that Melbourne Cup announcement, there's $100,000 for running last, which you would imagine would attract potentially more internationals. Do you think people will care or not?
I don't think. Look, the Melbourne Cup is the Melbourne Cup. I think if you had two donkeys in it, people will still pay attention to it because it's got the brand and it's got the reputation and the tradition over many, many years. So I don't think it'll make any difference.
So where are you with Racing Victoria at the moment? When Aaron Morrison started as CEO, it looked like there was an olive branch from both sides. Where's that now?
Look, we get along pretty well with Racing Victoria. I think the chairman, Tim Eddy, is a very good guy. He's certainly a very easy to get along with person. He looks at he takes your point of view on, and he certainly prosecutes his case if he doesn't agree with you. But at least he gives us the opportunity to prosecute our case. So it's a much better relationship. And look, we're not going to agree on everything, but the basics we agree on, and the one that's always the sticking point at the moment is this pattern, or as I call it, the black type guidelines, and we're stuck on that one for a little bit, but I'm sure we'll resolve that in the near future.
So that's the main things you butt heads with Victoria?
Yeah, look, at the moment, that's the only thing. All the other things we've got in common, and look, we're trying to do the best for the racing industry in our states, and I'll take my hat off to Racing Victoria. They're trying very hard in doing their best for their state, and they have to appreciate that I have to do the best for New South Wales.
There's been heavy speculation following a podcast that Buzz did earlier in the year about your future in racing. Can you tell us your contract situation with Racing New South Wales and the likelihood of extending that and you continuing both jobs?
Look, what I've said in the last 6 years since I've been chairman of the ARLC Commission and the CEO of Racing New South Wales is at the end of the year, I sit down with my family, I look at, how the year went, what my capacity is to continue doing both roles. And I've done that every year for 6 years. I'll do the same process again this year, and then I'll determine at the end of the year if I stay on in Racing New South Wales, if I stay on the NRL Commission, whatever decisions I make at the end of the year. And as I said, for the last 6 years, I've decided to do both roles. How long that'll continue, I'll tell you at the end of the year.
Do you still have the passion for racing that you once did?
Oh, absolutely. And, look, I think that racing in New South Wales, it's at the healthiest position it's ever been in. We, as I said, we pay the most to our participants, over $400 million per annum. And people are saying, well, how can you sustain that? Well, we've got $375 million in provisions to ensure that we can sustain both the prize money and capital upgrades. Now, last year we spent $60 million on capital upgrades, and we'll continue to do that. So not only are we paying the highest of any state in Australia back to our participants, which is very important because that's their wages, that's what they live on. We're also upgrading courses, tracks throughout New South Wales, and as I said, we've got $375 million up in our balance sheet to ensure the future of the New South Wales racing industry. I don't think there's too many racing jurisdictions that can say they've got that sort of money set aside to ensure our prize money levels stay where they are, to ensure that we've got money for capital upgrades. There's been a decline in turnover, but we'll probably still make a $10 million profit this year.
One thing people might not know is that you parlay both jobs into each other a little bit, like you gain intelligence from rugby league that you can use in racing and vice versa. Can you explain that a bit and maybe give us a few examples of that?
Look, during COVID was probably the best example of that, how the profile of rugby league and that I had assisted racing. We continued to race all the way through COVID, and that was because of we had great representation in government, and the government knew who I was because of my profile in the rugby league. So having the profile in both is certainly a big assistance for both sports, not just for racing or rugby league. And what I've discovered is things we do well in racing, they do bad in rugby league, and things they do well in rugby league, we do bad in racing. But there's also some common areas. Like, to give you an example, broadcast is a perfect example. We've got a disjointed international way to broadcast our races. Along comes DAZN, which is now taken over Foxtel. So the first thing I thought of, DAZN's got 400 million subscribers around the world. Well, why don't we have a world racing channel that every race meeting can go on this platform? So I've spoken to DAZN in relation to that. As I speak about rugby league, I take the advantage of also speaking about racing. If we can get that off the ground, that could be monumental for racing, not only in New South Wales and Australia, but for all the jurisdictions around the world.
That's exciting. So would they open to that idea? And that would include all states of Australia, I'm assuming, and everywhere in the world. Like, how long, did they like the idea? How long could it take to come to fruition? Where's it at?
They love the idea because Shay, who's the CEO, was the former CEO of Entain worldwide. So he's a real visionary, and I really admire him and how he does things. So if anyone can do it, it's Shay. I'm sure that he can produce that vision, worldwide. And as I said, this could be the biggest breakthrough for racing worldwide, with 400 million subscribers at the moment, and that's only going to go up. With DAZN getting more and more sporting products around the world, it's got one of the greatest platforms ever in the history of sport.
So just on that, do you feel racing broadcasting has been a bit too disjointed? Like, if you're a 21-year-old kid who likes races, you're not just watching New South Wales races or Victorian races or Queensland races. It can be quite convoluted. Sky 1, Sky 2, Racing.com, Channel 9, Channel 10, Channel 7. Has it been too disjointed, do you think?
Look, it has been disjointed, and certainly internationally it's completely disjointed. There's no, you should be able to go on a channel and watch every race that you want to in Japan, in England, in anywhere, in Singapore, wherever you want. Oh, they don't have racing in Singapore, sorry. Anywhere else in the world that you want to be able to watch a race, there should be a channel that you can have it. And look, a lot's got to do with TAB, and we have to talk to them because they own the vision rights at the moment. But in Australia, I suppose you can get all the races on Sky 1. I mean, if you're a real punter, the majority of the main races are on Sky 1. And Sky 1 really is the platform that generates the most turnover. Your other specialised stations like Racing.com and Thoroughbred Central, they're for the purists. And ironically, they're not the ones that are putting the money in. They're the ones that are the active participants in racing. But the punters, they all watch Sky 1. That's what they watch. That's why Sportsbet's got Sky 1. That's why TAB promotes Sky 1, because the majority of your turnover comes from that platform, because it shows every race meeting. As I said, the purists and the traditionalists, they like Racing.com and they like Sky Thoroughbred Central, but they're not the ones that are the punters.
What about Group 1 races? Obviously, the Golden Eagle isn't a Group 1 yet. You'd love to you would love for it to be a Group 1. Is that close? And also, I guess, the amount of Group 1 races in Australia, there's been a bit of criticism, not in New South Wales per se, but just generally that there's too many. Where do you sit on that?
Look, there probably is too many, but the hardest part is telling a club that you're going to have to go down to a Group 2 from a Group 1. So nobody wants to give up a Group 1. But you're right, there's a pyramid, and the Group 1 should be the grand finals, and there should be less of them. But at the same time, you can't stop innovation, and the Golden Eagle deserves to be a Group 1. I mean, look at its performance last year.
Is that close?
It's close. It's very close. Once I think these black type guidelines are settled, it qualifies. And under any criteria, it qualifies as a Group 1. So it should be a Group 1. And look at what it's done this year. I think it's got 10 individual Group 1 winners. Like, you know, the winners in Ascot, they're all around the world. They've won Group 1 races out of the Golden Eagle. And I was always a firm believer that, you know, every trainer that I used to ask, both in harness racing where I started and in thoroughbreds, I was lucky enough that, you know, I had people like Brian Hancock and A.D. Turnbull in harness racing. And I had Bart Cummings in thoroughbreds that used to advise me. And all of them said 4-year-olds is when the horse is at its peak. If you want a horse at its peak performance, they believe a 4-year-old was that peak performance. So that's why there was a gap in the Australian calendar for a real premier 4-year-old event, and that's where the Golden Eagle has taken that mantle. That it is the premier 4-year-old. It is the one that's everyone wants to be in, and not only from Australia but internationally. It's a $10 million race.
Do you think it'll be a Group 1 before the running?
I'm
of the
hoping.
sprint?
Look, if all goes to plan in relation to these black type guidelines, it should be. As I said, it qualifies under any criteria, the Asian patent criteria, the world criteria. It qualifies. It's over 115 in ratings. It has been for 3 years, so it qualifies. And last year was, you know, exceptional. I don't think there's a race anywhere in the world that's produced as many Group 1 winners as the Golden Eagle.
Yep. Rosehill Sale Inquiry. Did you feel sort of bruised a little bit coming out of that? You fought some good fights in your life, but it was a hostile experience, I guess, for a lot of people involved.
It was hostile, but look, I try to stay out of it, basically. I did not make public statements. I didn't go out there one way or the other. And I guess the future will tell you if it was a good decision or a bad decision. You know, it'll tell you, were we builders or were we destroyers? And only history is going to tell us that. You know, I could see commercially the financial benefits to it. You know, $5 billion, and that was net. That was after. You know, so realistically, it would have been $5.5 billion for the land. But you take democracy. The ATC members voted against it, and as I said, history will judge if that was a good decision or a bad decision, and are we builders or are we destroyers? And we'll know that in the future. But the beauty of it is, as I said earlier, we've got $375 million set aside for prize money and capital upgrade. So the racing industry is going to survive whichever way you look at it.
So Mark Latham, who strangely enough could have been Prime Minister at one stage, really went after you attack dog style through that period. Obviously, he's been the centre of his own headlines in the last few weeks. What have you made of all that?
Oh, look, I don't take much notice of all those things. Sometimes, you know, I don't think personal attacks are necessary. I think Mark, in this instance, you know, he deserves due process and natural justice to the accusations that have been made against him. I just try to do my job to the best of my ability, and I don't really worry too much what people say, because if you do, I wouldn't be doing it. You know, you'd be in the
so is it water
in the corner in the fetal position if you're worried about every bit of criticism. And look, in both jobs, there's a lot of criticism. There's a lot of people that want to tell you how to run your job, how to do your job, what you're doing wrong, what you're doing right. And if you listen to every one of them, you'd be in a mental ward. What
about Gay Wardhouse? Like, she's very well respected in racing, First Lady of Racing. She seemed to be pretty pointed in the criticism, I guess, of you and the process. What did you make of that? And have you talked to Gay about it?
No, I haven't spoken to Gay about it. Look, Gay's entitled to a viewpoint. Everyone's entitled to an opinion. The only thing that I say is, when you make an opinion, make sure you're correct in facts when you make the opinion. Gay had her opinion. I don't think she needed to get personal. If you get personal in an argument, I always think you're losing the argument. You know, if you need to go to that level and attack a person's character or their ability, it means that you're losing the substance of the argument. So I never attack anyone personally. I'll attack the issue. I'll prosecute my opinion or views, but you know, you don't know what's going through that person's mind at that particular point in time. So the last thing you want to do is affect it even more.
So how do you, I mean, people seem to either love you or loathe you, really. Most of them, certainly in New South Wales, love you. But the haters, for want of a better word, how do you sort of deal with them? And the ones that say, I guess, that their allegation is you're a dictator. It's your way or the highway. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think I find that as a compliment because I'm not. Wish I was a dictator. But look, the results speak for themselves. Both sports, both thoroughbred racing and rugby league are in the best position they've ever been in their history. So if I'm a dictator and I get those results and outcomes, I'm sure the participants aren't really concerned. That's the bottom line. But that's not reality. Reality is I've got a very high-powered board that I report to. I always take pride that I'm a servant of a board. I certainly take recommendations and prosecute them at the board meetings, but there's many that that have been declined or haven't gone forward, and so people don't really see it. And the biggest thing I get is, Jesus, you're not as bad as people say you are. When they 90% of the people that criticise me or the haters, as you call them, have never met me. If they had met me and made that judgment, I would be concerned. That's a natural human instinct. But they've never met me, so they don't know what I am. They don't know my personality. They don't know any attribute of me at all. They just see the media, they see what I say, and they judge me on that. And that's not the best way of judging someone. You judge someone when you meet them. You see their character. You see what they do. So that's why I don't take much notice, because they don't know me. If they knew me and they had that opinion, well, then I'd be a little bit concerned.
And just generally, what sort of state do you think racing in Australia, I suppose we're talking about New South Wales here, but just generally in Australia is in this wagering challenges, and I guess the Everest was designed to win the hearts of the younger generation. That's something that racing needs to do better more broadly, isn't it?
I agree. Look, I think we've done all the racing in Australia a big favour by promoting the Everest, because I think the Melbourne Cups had a resurgence from the young audience that we've been able to generate, And the funny thing is 30 to 40% of our young audience comes out of Victoria. In the old days, 45 or 50% of the Victorian crowd came from New South Wales, and it still does. But for the Everest, we get 30 to 40%, which means that we're promoting to the young person in Victoria just as much as we're promoting to the young person in New South Wales. And that's become evident when you look at the Victorian race meetings, they're getting a younger crowd. And that's a mistake that a lot of administrators make, is that they always look at 3-4 years out. They should be looking 20 years out, because 20 years comes very quickly. And I know it for a fact because it's come very quickly. And you've got to have a plan to get that next generation. Racing has made that blunder worldwide, where it hasn't looked at that next generation. You look at other jurisdictions around the world, like America, they've been complacent, and it's on the massive decline in America. Racing will be lucky to survive in the next 10 to 20 years in America. And because they never looked at the next generation, they thought, well, we've got the track, you come to it. No, that's not the case. You need to make your product and your sport attractive for people to come to. And that's why the Everest was so important to us, is that it's a race that's got its own, that it's for that generation. It's their generational race. It's not a traditional race. It had to be new. It had to be there, because kids don't do what their parents do. They buck what the parents do. So parents went on Facebook, the kids went on Snapchat and TikTok. They don't go to the same platform as their parents. So we needed to find them a race that they could engage in as being their own generational event, and that's what the Everest did. And one thing, I was talking to a university student, and he said, I don't know what you've done with racing, but they lived in the college themselves, and they said everyone just organises to go to races at the university. So it's now appealing to a younger audience, not just for the Everest, but for the whole year. And I pride myself in walking through Randwick and now in some of those bigger race meetings, and I used to see 50 plus demographic. Now I see 20 plus demographic, and a lot more of them. It's really weird how it's changed so quickly from this old audience to a much younger audience. And any sport that doesn't try to get that young audience or that next generation will perish, basically.
And you butted heads with breeders a bit. Do you think breeders should contribute more to the industry, more to racing, give something back?
Look, the breeders always say back to me that they're the biggest owners of horses in the racing industry. Now, they've produced reports, etc., to show that, and they probably are. I haven't got evidence to argue against them. So they do invest significantly already in the sense, but they also are the biggest winners of it, because if they've got a stallion and it's standing at $100,000 or $200,000 per service, well, that's significant revenue on their part. But to be fair to them, they do own a lot of horses, so they invest back in the industry, and if they do that, that's a good thing.
We broke the story earlier in the year about the World Series Jockey Global League with 12 jockeys signing up. With a bit of luck, it'll be up and running next year. Franchise-based competition. James McDonald, you seem to, when I spoke to you about that, you seem to really enjoy that idea. Can you tell us why?
Look, I think you've got to look outside the square. People too much look at their product and want to provide you the same product. And you've got to go with innovation. This is different. And look, it may succeed, it may not. But I just like the fact that someone's having a go. Go with something different to sell to a different audience.
Heroing the jockeys as well?
Heroing the jockeys. And that's one thing I've noticed in racing is we don't have the heroes in racing. Like in rugby league, which I do, all the players are heroes. They walk down the street, everyone wants a selfie with them. In racing, you don't have that same effect. Unless you're really in the racing industry, you don't know our major players. You don't know our major jockeys. So if you've got something that promotes that makes them a personality or a household name, you run and grab it. It's a good thing. So I saw a lot of criticism of it, but again, it's the same people that think that just because you've got a race course, people are going to turn up. They live in yesterday's land. They don't live in the future, and you've got to live in the future. If you don't live in the future, as I said, you'll perish.
Thanks for your time, Peter.
No worries.